I was not an engineer or in the fashion industry or a logistics or dry cleaning person. So it gave me this set of fresh eyes, but also this curiosity, just running at problems without the intimidation of how hairy and hard the full situation actually was. I have a good amount of experience in thinking through what problems still exist in the world of e-commerce, and there are still a lot of them.
The approach in trying to figure out how to solve these problems reminded me a lot of how engineers think and how engineers get things done.
Hi, I'm Brett Gibson, and welcome to HiBit, a new podcast where we do deep dives on the art of problem solving with engineers and technical experts from our community of early stage startups.
In today's episode, we're sitting down with our newest partner, Jenny Fleiss. Prior to joining Initialized, she co-founded Rent the Runway and Jet Black, and she helped set up Walmart's retail tech incubator. At Initialized, Jenny will be investing across various sectors, including consumer AI and healthcare.
The details of engineering problems fascinate me, but I'm just as interested in how the best engineers I know think, how they zoom in on which details matter the most, and then use that focus to navigate to elegant solutions. Join me on this journey as we discuss thorny engineering problems with my guests and get into the weeds about how they solve them.
Hey Jenny, it's great to see you, especially in the SF office.
It's great to be here. My puppy agrees. He's wandering around somewhere. He's having lots of fun.
He's been an amazing addition.
And I'm breaking into engineering territory here. I'm the first non-engineer guest.
So people are likely aware you're our newest partner. And so, I guess not that new anymore, and it's been a little bit. How's it been going so far?
I'm so excited to be here. It's been great. I really was very thoughtful in meeting a bunch of firms and thinking about what the right stage of investing and cultural fit would look like for me, and found Initialized, which is if anything, exceeded expectations. It's just such a group of entrepreneurial builders, operators, and that DNA just rings true day in and day out. And it's a great extension of my skill set to complement that with other partners who bring interests in climate and frontier tech and infrastructure, and also my network. I started a business on the East Coast. I went to school on the East Coast, and there's so much interesting stuff happening here in SF. To have that presence as well is a really nice complement and exposing me to a lot of game-changing entrepreneurs.
Yeah, well, likewise, it's been really delightful to have you, and especially a lot of your experience and having been in the shoes of a lot of the founders and understanding what they're going through has really resonated so far, both with us and the portfolio.
Thank you.
What is exciting you? What are you interested in? What are you looking at?
First off, I got excited about investing in part because this constant curiosity of scaling new learning curves, like dry cleaning, like logistics, technology, fashion, and disrupting and changing industries just was just constantly invigorating for me. And I think as an investor, you're working with people across lots of industries, Initialized being a generalist fund, you're constantly pushed to scale new learning curves, and you're talking and meeting with people who are using these skills to disrupt industries. And that's just a really, rich area to be in. I feel very lucky to be doing that. I think about a few things related to how do we disrupt industries today. So one is around e-commerce enablement. So I, of course, with Rent the Runway and then the work I did at Walmart, I have a good amount of experience in thinking through what problems still exist in the world of e-commerce, and there are still a lot of them. There's a lot related to logistics. There's a lot to site functionality, and so there's low-hanging fruit in there. Consumer technology generally, I think that there's the world of consumer tech and consumer AI, a lot that is changing in consumer behavior is largely as a result of advances in AI. And then if I'm gonna pick a third bucket, I think longevity, wellness as it relates to consumer is also exciting. Consumers are more thoughtful, self-aware, and caring for themselves, and mindful, thinking about how do they enhance the quality and the length of the time and that they have in this world.
Yeah, that's awesome. All very exciting areas. Well, cool. Well, I guess on to what we normally talk about on the podcast. I note that you're not an engineer by trade, but it's been pretty remarkable hearing you talk about a lot of the logistics challenges you've seen in your various roles
and how the approach in trying to figure out how to solve these problems reminded me a lot of how engineers think and how engineers get things done. And so I thought it'd be interesting, regardless, to talk with you through some of those problems and see what we learn.
Yeah, I'd love to. It's always fun reliving those like early formative, sometimes scarring memories, but no, that the really exciting times of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, and I think we were going to talk about Rent the Runway. So maybe like in terms of setting the stage, if it's not intuitive to people that it's a logistics business under the hood, you could say like what broadly is hard about delivering the product?
Well, when we launched Rent the Runway in 2009, we were a dress rental business, and women were renting dresses for their events, which typically were on the weekends. It was critical for us to be able to process that return, get the dress cleaned, inspected, sometimes repaired, and get it shipped out again the very next day, sometimes the same day, so that we could get it to the following customer that weekend. And you're dealing with like some of the most important events in people's lives, these like high stakes moments, someone's prom, the rehearsal dinner of their wedding, and the importance therefore of delivering a dress in good quality on the right time, the exact unit of inventory also, right? It wasn't like an interchangeable thing, meant a lot of specificity that was needed in logistics. And this world of reverse logistics really hadn't been systematized. Like we went and tried to look at Zappos with free shipping and free returns, and we walked into the warehouse and like they were still scrubbing the bottoms of the soles of sneakers, right? And like manually inspecting things. And so it wound up being this really hairy logistics problem and therefore opportunity that we undertook.
That's really interesting. And maybe we can start talking about the early iteration. So when you first came to the problem and realized the experience you wanted to deliver, what kind of state was it in? Like what tools were you using?
When we started building Rent the Runway, we were relying on local dry cleaners. And in particular, my local dry cleaner, I befriended, initially asking him, like, how much does it cost to clean a dress? And I noticed that he had an empty rack in his facility. And I said, could we keep our dresses here? Because we didn't have a warehouse. And so we essentially made his dry cleaning space into our warehouse.
That's wild. And what was his attitude toward the whole operation? I'm curious about the general demeanor of a random dry cleaner whose facility you took over.
It was a really fortuitous situation because Miguel was his name, and he had a dry cleaning company called Slate, and he was actually an entrepreneur, and his family had come from an entrepreneurial family in Mexico. Therefore, it wasn't like a traditional dry cleaner that maybe wouldn't have been as forward-thinking or technical or excited about entrepreneurship. Yeah. But he was really in it to help us and partner with us and to collaborate and ideate with us. And so that is for sure also was like a game changer and what drew us to working with him in particular.
It's interesting. I mean, I think there's a lot of themes there across startups of people who are very impactful in interesting ways early on. So you have one dry cleaner, you basically taken it over, it's like at capacity or something, and you have to figure out how to scale up from there. So what do you do next?
We definitely got to a place where we were busting at the seams, literally. The first step was convincing Miguel to buy more equipment and to offer to fund part of it. And so we did that. We took over another rack and we kind of started to really dominate the space in a big way. And then there really just wasn't the throughput that we needed on those critical days, right? Because of this kind of density problem in the middle of the week where everyone was cleaning and we're running the machines 24/7, paying overtime for the team to work overnight and anything like that. And so we started to go to additional dry cleaners. And that meant that we had our inventory in multiple places. So the moment that we needed a dress to ship out urgently, it was this process of hunting it down amidst what quickly became 4, 5, 6 different dry cleaners. And with that time sensitivity, the ability to, without barcodes at that point, track these dresses and then get them cleaned, repaired, and shipped out within a day total, really just became untenable at some point. And there was too many consumer-related errors that we started to face. And we definitely needed software solutions. It wound up being that the software we needed to build resembled a dry cleaning system, maybe much more than it did a traditional warehouse management system, because a dry cleaner does receive units from a customer. They need to have a code of some sort to track that particular unit. They need to process it through cleaning, and then they ultimately need to send it back out again. So it's a form of reverse logistics, whereas most e-commerce operations are not built for a product that goes both in and out. And so we used a combination of the systems that we saw in the dry cleaning world, and I looked at many, not just Miguel's, but I went and looked at other dry cleaning facilities as well. And then we also looked at some warehouse management systems like diapers.com. So At the time, diapers.com was really the only warehouse management system that had been built from the ground up by their company, and it was in the New York area. So it was a great opportunity to network with that team, and they allowed us to like come to their warehouse, to like look over their shoulder at their systems and what they were building, and to draw inspiration. I remember like trying to draw wireframes that like resembled some of what they had done, to really just learn and try to figure out what we could build and how we could enhance our very own product.
That's really interesting. And then you realized that something off the shelf wasn't going to work, and had some semblance of like what the system needed to be. And was it a matter of building a team to build that out, or what was next?
It definitely ultimately required building a team. My first hope was that there would be something off the shelf that we could leverage. So once we hit like our breaking point of relying on different dry cleaners, warehouse systems, and some of the bare bones things that we had built, we did start speaking to some of the bigger players, Manhattan Associates, Knighted, and we did RFP processes. Like I spent many cycles looking at their products and what they have and trying to debate, do I take their products and customize and work with them to customize, which they do often, or do we build it ourselves? And ultimately, after like months of really working through like what would it be like to work together and learning a lot in that process, I decided that we needed to build it our own, and that if we did it, it would ultimately be a really proprietary, great asset to have, because nothing like that existed. Like, I knew enough to know that this was really special and unique because it wasn't out there already. And so that led us to take the one engineer who had built the initial, he called it YAMS, yet another management system, almost to like tease, because I initially didn't even know what a WMS was. And we built out a team. We built out like a separate team who was building this warehouse system, and a product team eventually also, to help think through all of the wireframes and the flows that we needed.
And was it a fairly linear process to go from, we know we need to build this, and do you figure these people out? Or was it, where there kind of like fits and starts?
Yeah, I don't know that anything in entrepreneurship is a linear process. It's like you try your best. It's more of a jungle gym, it feels like often. It was like a trial and error and learning. And to me, some of the problems that are like the most interesting and fun is where there's not a linear path, or there's not like a prescriptive solution, or if it's linear, you don't know what that looks like yet. You have to define it and create it yourself. And what became really relevant as we built the tech systems, but also as we built the actual operational processes, was hiring a team that didn't come from a traditional logistics background. We needed people who were like open-minded, eyes wide open, and who had often some logistics experience, but were really oriented towards doing something like from the ground up with a clean slate. And that's ultimately where, when I did hire myself out of the role in leading logistics, I hired someone who had run the biggest dry cleaner in the Northeast. And I got to know him because he had taught me about dry cleaning. And he'd let me look at his systems. And after working, enough on the project, suddenly our business was big enough that I was able to convince him to come over.
That's interesting. And it's almost like this core insight that this is a lot like a dry cleaning business scaled with the various phases you're in.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, it also makes me think of, like, related to that, this core insight where, like, we didn't have a product team for our front end either, right? Like, we actually had a product team for our warehouse system before we had one for our front end. And when people would ask, like, who's your chief product officer? We were like, well, what does that mean? And when they would describe what it was, so we're like an East Coast startup, right? Like West Coast, like all the VCs, like, well, who's your chief product officer? Can we meet them? We realized that, like, our head of customer insights, which was like customer service, like actually kind of was our chief product officer. And we then put her into that role subsequently. So I think, like, the way we built and ran the business was like, what do we actually, the problem we need to solve for? Like, what's the most efficient way we can solve it versus using like an existing template? And that was really fun.
Yeah, because people think of product like an interface or some sort of, like user interface, but the product really is the dress getting there on time.
Yeah, product is the experience you build for your customers. It's listening to feedback from your customers and then iterating the product to make it better at every moment. And what we were renting, what we're still renting, is an experience, right? Where, like, this isn't about like the cost or the convenience. It's the feeling a woman gets when she puts on an amazing dress and she feels like she can take on the world. And so every part of our experience, from the way the site looked and felt to like running the warehouse and delivering the dress in perfect condition, no wrinkles, and a beautiful package on time, we're like, we can't, use a 3PL and let go of that part of the experience. Like, everything that touched the customer experience, we felt this need to really own and make sure it was aspirational.
And on the logistics side, was there a moment or moments where you're like, okay, we figured it out, this works? Or was it just ongoing, like, all right, we got through that bottleneck and now there's something else?
It always felt like there was something new. Like there was really special moments, walking into the warehouse once the dry cleaning equipment arrived. But like more than anything, there still is always something more you can do to enhance and improve it, right? And I think that's part of what's really fun when you're creating a new system and a new disruptive business model. Like an entrepreneurial mind will always find ways to continue to tweak and optimize it. So we went from starting inside of a dry cleaner to then having our own warehouse, but still working with several dry cleaners, to eventually getting a warehouse that was large enough and compliant to have our own dry cleaners, to then started innovating on the dry cleaning processes. We started buying steam tunnels from companies in Germany or automatic bagging systems to like make the process more efficient using, initially barcodes and then RFID tags. We started thinking about how could we use automatic sortations based on the urgency of the turnaround time of a dress, or the degree of wear and tear that it had because each barcode or RFID tracks to the number of times it's been worn. So maybe this is more likely to go to the repair team for an extra inspection at this point.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like the reward for figuring out hard things is more hard things behind them.
And I often say like there's a beautiful thing in being like somewhat naive. It's like I was not an engineer or in the fashion industry or a logistics or dry cleaning person. Like there was like so much I hadn't done. So it gave me this set of fresh eyes, but also this like curiosity, and then this like just running at problems without the intimidation of how hairy and hard the like full situation actually was.
Yeah, that's a theme I feel like you hear all the time. But both the first-time founders being willing to do things because they don't understand how hard it's going to be, and also taking on things that other people, the more senior people might dismiss as impossible. Were there any big mistakes you made along the way?
There's a lot of big mistakes I've made along the way, and I really do feel like that's how you learn. The one that comes to mind most is when we first started building the Rent the Runway site. I didn't have a technical background, nor did my co-founder. We had tried to hire a technical co-founder, and we were unable to. And at some point, the clock is ticking, and we decided to work with an agency. And we did a really thoughtful RFP process. We then wrote an extensive requirements document, picked an agency, negotiated the contract, and we're like, okay, there you go. Like, we'll see you in a month, and then again in 2 months. And like, in a month, whatever they showed us was really unconvincing, and we started to get a little nervous. Like, we had a timeline to hit to get our product up before the holiday season when people were renting dresses. And so I went and flew to Canada, and I should have obviously done it much sooner, but it turned out that the team that was supposed to be like 7 engineers we were paying for, like one guy showed up at 11 a.m. and that was kind of it. And eventually the head of the agency kind of popped on by, and I had assumed that I couldn't really manage that part of the business because I wasn't an engineer. And yet, by being there alone, you can see who is working and who's not working. You can see that the office could only fit 3 people, right? I was able to like look over the shoulder as he was like building and what he was doing and try to ask like what may have been dumb questions, but like a great engineer can answer questions that might be silly and explain them. Within a few hours, it was clear to me that this was not a relationship that was going to work. And so I made like what was very hard, painful, and at the time felt like an expensive decision to cut bait and part ways with that agency. And then I was left to find a new solution within like a couple of months. At that point, we had probably like less than 2 months left to get a whole site up that was like very complex. And I found a company that had a team in India, but they also had a couple of local people in the New York area. So I was able to sit with the people in the New York area, and they managed the engineers in India, but I was like so hands-on every single moment, every single day. And I parallel processed that with hiring our own engineering team. And it became very clear to me that having people who were there in the same space day in, day out would not only let us iterate and get the comfort to build this like mission critical product, but also was like part of how I learned, because I was able to like be with them and interact every day and just get more comfortable and well-versed in managing engineers and understanding what they were doing and like very tangibly seeing if it felt like there was a milestone we were missing, so that we felt ahead of the game. And we were able to ultimately get the site launched in a very spaghetti code sort of way. But we did it, and we got those holiday orders, and then we like scotch taped it on the back end until we could rebuild.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, it makes, and I think we've seen a lot of stuff like that in the past, where it's the number of hops between the engineers and the actual customers, just from a relationship basis, is like impacts how much they care or understand, or are thinking like product engineers and not just like coders.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had like really great success when we hired some female engineers because our product is oriented towards women. And I think often people who are the end consumer feel really connected and passionate about the product. They often like really relate to the end use case. So they might bring ideas of how they could do something differently as well. They're not just doing it as a job. They're doing it because it's something that's like meaningful to them on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that's awesome. This has been really fun. Thanks a lot for making the time.
Thanks for chatting about it. It was fun walking back down memory lane.
That's it for this episode with Jenny Fleiss, our newest partner here at Initialized.
Highbit is produced by Initialized Capital. Our showrunner is Candy Chang. Our videographer and editor is Kevin Heinz. And I'm Brett Gibson. Thanks for listening.